Giannis and Joel Embiid. What do they have in common? Well, they're two of the greatest players in the modern generation, both former MVPs with individual accolades across the board.
Giannis' third block, he's gonna take it off! Oh, hey! A hammer!
In fact, they are the only two Eastern Conference players to win the MVP since LeBron James back in 2013, when he was in Miami. That's kinda crazy. In over a decade from then until now, only Giannis and Embiid were serious MVP candidates from the East. These two players, along with Nikola Jokic, revitalized what it means to be a big man, and they all helped usher in a new era after a long time of guards and wings dominating the league. Unfortunately, there's also some other things Giannis and Embiid have in common. In particular, their habits of getting untimely injuries right when the playoffs begin. And even worse, being stuck in the absolute worst situations imaginable for any superstar. For Giannis, who already won the championship, his journey to seek another has been nothing but misery. And for Embiid, who has yet to pass the second round of the playoffs, and with the most decorated injury report of any superstar of this era, he's never been able to put together a truly special postseason. And both of them are now a part of rosters that can't compete, nor have a future to build with. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, let's take a look at arguably the two best players in the Eastern Conference for several years now. And how did they find themselves in these circumstances? A hole where they've struggled to climb out of for years now. Without further ado, let's begin.
Flips it, Heel throws it up, it's off, Hart rebounds and it's over! This war of attrition is won by the Knicks!
I think what separates Joel Embiid from most other superstars of his caliber is the amount of hate and vitriol thrown his way. Heck, even James Harden at his prime did not see this type of hatred. With Harden, it was primarily his foul drawing capabilities that severely pissed people off. However, at least Harden was always available and never had the injury excuse to fall back on. For Embiid, it's like you're taking Harden's foul drawing antics and adding on even more questionable plays, but also the fact that he misses so many games year after year, to the point where his body breaks down every time the playoffs are about to start. So as talented as Embiid is, his lack of availability has hurt his team just as much as the Sixers' attempt to build around him. Right before the start of the 2024-25 season, Joel Embiid dropped this quote right here. "If I had to guess, I would probably never play back-to-backs for the rest of my career." And yeah, this statement surely drew some attention from the league office, and fined him and the Sixers organization for even suggesting he'd purposely sit out games. He said this after missing the entire preseason, too, suggesting that there's something seriously wrong with his body. This is not what you want to hear from your franchise player. When it comes to availability, Embiid is on a very short leash with the fan base. Whenever he sits out, whenever he even has the slightest injuries, everyone always expects it to be something more serious. That looks like the case yet again. Remember, back in February of 2024, Embiid suffered a torn meniscus, an injury that normally takes most NBA players 2 or 3 months to recover from. But Embiid is no ordinary player. By the start of the 2024 playoffs, Embiid and the Sixers felt a sense of urgency. He has yet to stay healthy for a single playoff run in his entire career, so the pressure was mounting. He needed to come back and perform, which he actually did.
Little hesitation, contact, and he hits! Boy, and somehow there was no...
Unfortunately, it seems like he came back a bit too early.
Well, that's just unacceptable to, put us in that situation. That's unacceptable. And to lose a game like this, especially in the playoffs. So, yeah.
Following an unceremonious first-round exit, Embiid once again has returned back to rehabbing his knee. It seems he came back way too quickly, thus causing a major setback in his recovery. These recurring knee problems have haunted him for years, but it's only half the reason why the Sixers have failed to make any deep playoff runs. The other half being their franchise-altering decision in the 2019 offseason. The offseason where they signed Tobias Harris to a $180 million contract. A deal that would cripple the franchise for Joel Embiid's entire prime. Not just that, but in that same offseason, they lost both Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick, their best three-point shooter coming off a career season. Butler would go on to reinvigorate his career in Miami, and even knocked out the Sixers in the playoffs himself, as he led the Heat to 2 finals appearances in 4 years. The Sixers, on the other hand, were now stuck with Tobias for 5 seasons. Because not only was his contract untradeable, he had a knack for vanishing when it matters most. Tobias Harris and his disappearing acts were the bane of their existence. The most useless $180 million a team has ever spent. He just never had the mentality to win. Around this time, the Sixers' process was seen as a revelation, a team that built their roster from scratch, tanking, but ultimately ended up with just Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons as their young players to build around. So when Ben Simmons also pulled a disappearing act and did not have the mental fortitude to handle all the pressure, that marked the end of this duo, and thus began an era of Embiid alone. This is when they, what I like to call, flipped the desperation mode switch. With their whole process era seemingly failed, they've resorted to the only thing they can do, making desperate attempts to acquire stars past their prime, and hope they still have an ounce of talent left in the tank. That's why they made the trade for James Harden, and that's why they signed a past his prime, injury-prone Paul George to a $50+ million deal. They need to do whatever they can to salvage the rest of Embiid's best years. As the rest of the Eastern Conference made noticeable improvements, the Sixers lagged behind, and as a result, their championship window has most likely closed. If there's one player I feel bad for, it's Tyrese Maxey. Surrounded by the drama and relentless animosity of their own fans, Maxey is the one guy who doesn't deserve all this. The young point guard got thrown into the fire. With the absence of Embiid, it's Maxey who's expected to carry the burden of the entire franchise. On one hand, it may look like Joel Embiid is stuck on a franchise that failed him. On the other hand, you could also say the franchise is stuck with Joel Embiid, and he failed them. This is the man they got as a result of years of tanking, an injury-prone, drama-filled superstar who the entire world outside of Philly despises. Perhaps it's time for a change, for the team and for Joel Embiid. Some Western Conference executives were asked about potentially trading for Giannis if the Bucks decide to make a move. This was their response. Quote, "Teams are circling and hopeful," said one Western Conference team executive. "I wouldn't be surprised if it happened by the trade deadline," said another. Giannis, when asked the same question, said, "Yeah, if we don't win another championship, I might get traded. Yeah, this is the job we live. This is the world we're living in." In some ways, Giannis is the complete opposite of Embiid. He already proved he's capable of winning a title and excels in the playoffs, with some of the greatest postseason performances among this generation of superstars. Plus, he's generally well-liked among most fan bases, due to his charismatic personality. For a long time, he was considered the golden boy among superstars who could do no wrong. However, what he does share in similarity with Embiid is, ever since he won that championship in 2021, the Bucks, like the Sixers, have only gone downhill since then, and their championship window is quickly closing, despite Giannis still playing at the peak of his prime. Much like Embiid and the Sixers, the best supporting cast that Giannis was surrounded with was much earlier in his career, but as the years went by, teams that are younger and better have overtaken them. They've improved much faster than the Bucks can keep up. For this team, it's a combination of an aging roster and the lack of development in their youth. For most championship teams that want to win multiple titles, they need to have a smooth transition between the old and the young. The Bucks, unfortunately, had no transition period. As their core of role players and starters got older, there was simply nobody to replace them. The result? They're still playing a 36-year-old Brook Lopez over 30 minutes a game, when he's clearly not the player he used to be. In fact, they are the oldest team in the entire NBA, with an average age of 30.4. Here's another thing. I'm sure you're all aware of the second apron, correct? Basically, it's a luxury tax threshold. They will be severely restricted in their team building. such as they can't use the mid-level exception to acquire a decent player. They can't trade multiple players in a sign and trade. Heck, they might even lose a first-round pick in the future. Anyway, the Bucks happen to be just one of 4 teams above the second apron tax line. Essentially, they're screwed if they stay where they are, especially with a roster with zero chance of competing for the title. To add on, their decisions over the years haven't been that bad. I mean, the big one, the Damian Lillard trade, isn't as good as expected. But who would have known that at the time? When the Bucks got him, Lillard had the best season of his career in his final year in Portland.
Dame again. He just rolls by Wagner, elevates and packs it. Exerts his will.
Drew Holiday, on the other hand, came off of some horrendous playoff performances. It's reasonable to assume that Damian Lillard would be a great addition to the team, but he's not a young buck either. Aging leads to inconsistency, and while he's been magnificent in some games, he looks completely out of it in others. It's not really the Damian Lillard trade that killed this team. It's actually their lack of trades. And by sticking with the same roster, the Bucks felt too confident in the same roster that won the championship. So they didn't try to improve their team that much, because they felt like they didn't need to. Anyway, there's a lot of problems with the Milwaukee Bucks roster. Everything from their lack of productive bench or lack of young talent to their older legs not keeping up anymore. It even extends to Giannis himself, who kind of avoided the injury narrative for most of his career, at least compared to Embiid. However, if you look into it, in 5 playoff runs from 2020 to 2024, Giannis has missed games due to injury in 4 of those 5 postseasons. Perhaps he's not as injury-prone as Embiid, but he still gets injured quite often. In particular, his recurring back and calf issues that's plagued him for so long. Similar to Embiid, it's hard to put all the blame on Giannis' supporting cast, if he himself has trouble staying on the floor to help them win. Oh, and who can forget the biggest similarity between these two? They both had Doc Rivers as their head coach. The most overrated coach of the last several decades. But we're not even going to talk about his coaching ability. We're going to talk about how the minute he walked through the doors as the Sixers and Bucks head coach, he made up excuses left and right. On the Bucks, he took over a team that went 32-14, and the first thing he said was, quote, "I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I even told them, can we wait until after the All-Star break?" Doc Rivers sounded like he literally didn't want the job, but got forced into it. Like, wow, thanks Doc. That's certainly not something I'd want to hear if he was my coach. Anyway, he proceeded to finish out the season with just a 17-19 record, and was asked about why his team was struggling, to which he responded, "I've actually been sitting back and watching everything, not just our players, but our travel crew, everything. We don't have the necessary professionalism, seriousness on the road." Like seriously, he's blaming the travel crew. Of course, Sixers fans know all too well about Doc's tendency to deflect all the blame to everyone but himself. Remember when he straight up blamed a playoff series loss on Ben Simmons? Which, he might have been right, but still, you don't throw your player under the bus like that. Or what about the time he blamed James Harden or Joel Embiid? He would throw everyone under the bus except for himself, but maybe it's time for the bus driver himself to be thrown under there. Basically, I mentioned Doc Rivers because it shows a larger issue of their coaching. Both the Sixers and Bucks have had a massive turnover in their coaching staff through the years. Yet, nothing has worked. There's no continuity, they have no identity. When you hire Doc Rivers, it's basically like saying this is a last-ditch attempt. Like they have no other choice but Doc, which is funny. I've always thought of Giannis as a Bucks lifer. Early in his career, he's always wanted to be talked about in the same way as Tim Duncan or Dirk Nowitzki. Superstars who've stayed with the same team their entire careers and became local legends of their city. For Giannis, however, he's kind of had a change of heart over the years. His desire to win championships has outweighed his desire to stay in Milwaukee. Back in 2023, he was quoted saying in an interview, "If there's a better situation for me to win the Larry O'Brien, I have to take that better situation." Yeah, it all makes sense now. When you hear all the trade rumors surrounding Giannis, it's becoming a real possibility. that one of the league's most iconic superstars might actually be gone. One might think it's Joel Embiid who'd get traded before Giannis, but it seems like plenty of teams have been calling the Bucks way more, with offers on the table already. His time in Milwaukee could come to an end sooner than we realize. Anyway, that's all folks. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. What do you make of Embiid or Giannis' situations? Do you see the Sixers or Bucks ever becoming legit contenders once again? And out of these two guys, which one do you see getting traded first? Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. And of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.